Hi there. I'm going to try and do this with the puppy dog enthusiasm of Rory Smith here, if that's possible. Just to say, start in the usual way actually, which is to say we continue to enjoy putting this show together. It's been great fun so far, and we think it can be great fun for quite a while. However, to keep that going, to keep Libero flowing as it is, we need your help, and we need your help with liking, subscribing, recommending, even throwing in a few ideas. We've got comments under the YouTube page. We've got an email account. That's liberopodcast0@gmail.com. We'll go back to that at the end of the show. And like, subscribe, tell your friends. Let's just keep this show on the road. As I say, this has been great fun for all of us. We're finding out a lot about each other, actually, most of all. And that's the kind of journey we're on. That's what we're doing it for. Is that enthusiastic enough for you, Rory? Welcome to episode 26 of Libero, the podcast about the most important of the least important things, as I think it was Bobby Robson once said. So as you probably heard, I'm here with Rory Smith, chief football writer of The Observer, and also a man in a blazer. He's from the county of Yorkshire. And Miguel Delaney, award-winning author. I think you can get his magnum opus on audiobook, can't you? Cheap prices.
Yeah, it did well on Audible, so Audible put it on sale. Selected for the summer sale, just
£5 I paid, and it's accompanied me up and down the country.
And unlike this, you don't really have to listen to me because I only do the intro and the outro.
It's funny, isn't it, that like the ultimate compliment that Audible can pay you is is putting your work on sale. In the same way as like having written books, and Miguel have experienced this as well. Like you want to be in. Like you love being in those little sort of independent bookstores where everything's really perfectly curated, but you know you've hit the big time when you're in Tesco. That's what matters. You want to be in Tesco. Yeah. You want your book in Tesco.
Yeah, I regret to inform you, Miguel, that you're still not in Waterstones in Macclesfield, where, as I do see Wilson, I do see Michael Cox,
should be there.
I do see Josh. Well, you should be there. Maybe you've sold them out. I don't know.
Could be that.
Anyway, so actually, another hat that Miguel wears is the chief football writer of The Independent. Or is it correspondent? These titles are important. I'm John Brewin. That's all I do. So we speak on the eve of the 2025 inaugural FIFA Club World Championship. And so on Sunday at 1 a.m, I'll be trying to find DAZN, whatever that is, to watch Al Ahly versus Inter Miami. And but anecdotally, we're told for a couple of bucks, you could actually be there because tickets aren't selling well. And the reverse end of surge pricing is you can get them for nothing if you really want to. So that's if you're in the vicinity of the Hard Rock Stadium, of course, which isn't actually the usual home of Beckham FC, of course. Messi and co. play out at Fort Lauderdale, as we understand it, in a 21,000 stadium, which is about the size of... Who's 21,000? Charlton Athletic.
Park?
No, probably bigger.
Bigger than that, yeah.
It's bigger than Brentford.
Bigger than
Brentford, yeah.
It's basically Brentford plus Bournemouth together. That's about what you're looking at, isn't it?
Florida is Brentford with alligators.
We've always said that. So it feels like we're in tournament mode here, because it wouldn't be a tournament without the country itself being up in flames, to be quite honest. To quote the late great Sly Stone, there's a riot going on. That's in LA, which is on the West Coast, rather than the East Coast. The thing is, over the years, all three of us here, we've written pieces ahead of a tournament about how it's going to be for people to go there. I mean, going back to 2006, the rise of neo-Nazism, 2010, carjackings in South Africa, the favelas in 2014, 2018. Well, maybe we should have thought a bit more about the Russian thing. And Qatar 22, well, that had that 12-year build-up, didn't it? And that was given quite the build-up. And one of the accusations from those not in the Western press is that we aren't going to attack America with the same journalistic rigour as perhaps we did Qatar. And let's see if we can disprove that between us. I'm sure we can. But this is America's chance to shine, as all these tournaments are. But let's start with Rory. 2025, funded by Saudi cash, held in the US. Do you think holding it in the US adds some element of legitimacy to this tournament? I'm thinking back to 2015, those arrests in the Café du Lac?
Bar au Lac.
Bar au Lac in Switzerland. And I think that's where the journey started here, isn't it, to this tournament?
Yeah, and do you know what? I'm going to give you credit for this, John, because it was a point you raised in our WhatsApp group yesterday, and I think I'd not really thought of this before, but I think it's a really valid point, is that to FIFA it's really important to have this competition, this Club World Cup, in the States rather than in Saudi or in China, because I think it would look much more like a novelty if it had been held in Saudi. And that's the point you made, and I agree with it. I'm happy to be your voice on this subject. Despite the fact that you're here and also have a microphone. I think that putting it in the States obviously makes it more appealing to the clubs because they're all totally obsessed with the American market. But it also makes it look like, I don't know, it's not such a naked cash grab. I think if you put it in Saudi, it would be dismissed, especially in Europe, as a really kind of venal attempt just to make some money. Whereas by playing it in the States, by giving it that slot that was traditionally reserved for the Confederations Cup, it looks like, it's a bit of a warm-up for the World Cup next year. It is a kind of, I think it makes it feel more legitimate. More authentic is a difficult thing to sort of define, but definitely more legitimate. And it's not, there's lots of things that are FIFA's fault. One of them is not that it's a slightly weird time to be sending even like a watered-down jamboree to the States. Like, this is a difficult moment. In America, obviously, the opening game is in Miami, but they are playing across the country. There are various protests around the States at the moment. I think there's the National Guard on the streets in LA. I think it's hard to tell at the moment because it's so hard to sort of separate misinformation from truth. I think I saw a picture of a tank in Washington, D.C. I don't know whether that was new or whether it had been spun up on grot. I don't know. It's hard to tell these days. But this is a weird time for something to be in the States. And there's certainly the point where I think if you were travelling from South America in particular, the clubs that have qualified, maybe Egypt as well and the rest of North Africa, you might have second thoughts about going to the States. There's enough anecdotal evidence to suggest it's not quite the obvious holiday destination it once was for people from those countries. And that, as I'm sure Miguel will mention, and as we will cover a lot more in the run-up to the World Cup next year, that's even more pronounced for that tournament. I mean, Iran have qualified, and currently, as things stand, the only Iranian people allowed into the US are the players on the football team. Yeah. The fans aren't allowed to go, and that to me seems unsustainable. I don't think that can be right, that there's a team playing in a World Cup that the fans aren't allowed to attend at all. Just as it wasn't right that in 2022 in Qatar, if you were a gay fan of a team, any team, you would have had to make a really big decision about whether you attended or not. We criticised Qatar for that, rightly, and I think it's right to criticise America for banning all Iranians of whatever sexual persuasion. But for the Club World Cup, I think there's no question that it'll be a blow to FIFA that it looks like it's going to play out, certainly the start of it, against the background of what counts as civil unrest.
Yeah, and perhaps empty stadiums. We'll have to see on that. Now, Miguel, this is tied in, of course, with 2026.
Yeah.
I remember I was in Manchester in 2017 at Soccer X, and there was a speech given by, I was sat with our friend Josh Robinson, sat with the guy giving the presentation of the North American bid. Obviously, we forget sometimes, don't we, that Mexico and Canada are part of this.
Trump, sorry, Infantino hasn't been so willing to kind of close to their premiers.
No, and I mean, the funny thing, he gave a speech like, when you see a boxer who is put in against a bum and is going to win quite easily. It was one of very, very confident that they were going to get this, and Trump was president then, of course, back in 2017. But it feels to me like the Infantino machine has moved into several gears since then. 2022 being the crowning glory, despite his own antics with feeling like a migrant worker or whatever it was, that dreadful speech that he hasn't really repeated, has he? He probably learned his own lesson there.
There's no plan for a press conference for this.
Yes, and
there was an official dinner on Friday night in Miami, just an hour from Mar-a-Lago, of course.
Really, of course. And there's this idea, of course, that actually with a bit of sort of American-style PR, I thought, at the end of the 2020 World Cup, which was, this was the greatest World Cup of all. Remember that message?
Always.
Just being shoved straight down your neck. And it was like, it was good. The final was great. But was it really?
But on that as well, I think there's an interesting thing. And you're like, obviously, yes, this is absolutely a kind of a twin package with 2026. But it's almost like they're different sides of the same package, the same coin. So whereas 2026, I think, it's very consciously already being kind of put forward as the MAGA World Cup. And I think already human rights groups, they've already written about how they've brought up kind of some of the issues that they're worried about in America, not least kind of marginalization of groups, even kind of trade union deals, about how Trump will use the World Cup to further his political agenda. He's already talked about how the only reason how he's going to actually be president for the World Cup is because, in his own words, what happened was the 2020 election. But with 2025, I think it's a bit from the other direction. It's almost, rather than kind of America using a football tournament for itself, an American regime or American political administration use the World Cup for itself. This is more about, I think, FIFA trying to use America because, and also I suppose it's about selling the club game to America and to a certain degree, I suppose, the promotion of the entire Infantino era. I mean, this tournament, as criticised as been, it comes in, I suppose, in a very interesting era in football history, which is basically, as everyone sees, partly for all these reasons, because there's so many tournaments going to the States, it's not just these two, but also you've got booming supporter interest. You only have to look at investors in the Premier League and elsewhere. Everyone in football basically sees the US as the new frontier. That's literally the way they're describing it. All sorts of historical echoes there. And this is almost kind of, this Club World Cup is almost, it allows FIFA first mover advantage in what is essentially kind of a land grab, really, as everyone tries to work in the States. And there's all these sort of clashes and tensions between UEFA and FIFA over the future of the sport. As amid kind of widespread expectations that the structures we know, domestic leagues, what the Champions League has been, that this could start moving to kind of a fully globalized game. And of course, I mean, at the core of all that, I mean, Infantino, who, we know well from the Champions League draws, was seen as quite a competent general secretary at UEFA, but he also saw firsthand the sheer lucrative power of the club game. And ever since he got in to FIFA in 2016, after those kind of after those upheavals that kind of ended the Bladder era, he's been, obsessed essentially with having this tournament. Again, there's two sides to the tournament as well. It was initially Zvonimir Boban's idea, who wanted to get rid of the Confederations Cup, which he thought was ridiculous, and felt we could have something a bit more kind of structured and a bit more kind of global for the club game. And I do think there actually is a nobility to that. But obviously, Infantino has seen this idea and just gone with it. And while the idea might be noble, there's all sort of criticism and questions of the game and how its implementation has been it's brought a lot of questions.
There's this idea, isn't it, that Gianni's looking for that sort of Henri Delaunay, that Jules Rimet, historical, casting himself into football history, though his activities are a bit more Havelange, a bit more Blatter. He's grown up in a different era. There's a different side of politics in football and in global politics as well. In tandem with that, I know you've mentioned this to us before, and you've written about it. There's another mover and shaker in the soccer world, Florentino Perez, never knowingly undersold or underselling himself. There's the idea that Real Madrid would really like to win this to repeat, to become you said this, Santiago Bernabeu, of course, who it was the president when they.
I mean, and again, like this kind of drives a lot of discussions in the Super League. And at one point, this idea for the Club World Cup was actually intertwined with the Super League. It was around 2018, right through to its demise in 2021. It came out afterwards, although FIFA ultimately went against the Super League. Everyone in football talks about how, there were all sorts of discussions about potential agreements that the Super League would allow some of its clubs into the Club World Cup, all of this sort of thing. Perez, I mean, Madrid, one of Madrid's great frustrations is they see themselves as having actually created the European Cup and created, by extension, UEFA. Because really the tournament was just given to fledgling UEFA in 1955. And Madrid, I mean, they haven't always had resentments about this, but some of this is allowed to kind of drive current resentments. Perez hasn't as yet got a Super League. And this is sort of seen as a bit of an alternative almost. And like, given kind of the influx of Saudi cash, given, as you say, where it's staged, it is almost seen as a potential kind of IPL event. I know this has been discussed by the lads already. IPL event that disrupts football. And on those lines, to kind of only further Perez's legacy, in the same way that, as you say, Infantino sees himself as something equivalent to kind of these great statesmen of the game, or great maybe a bit of a, not necessarily the adjective a lot of people would use, but Perez almost sees this kind of furthering the echoes between himself and Santiago Bernabeu. It's not just about winning European Cups, but then he gets to win the first of a new tournament that they think will kind of go on and be the future of the game. So Madrid will kind of, befitting their grandeur, will have been the first European champions and the first world champions. There is just one thing I feel it's worth raising here that we've maybe talked a little bit about on the pod before. It is impossible not to link this to kind of this recurring issue in football, and it's why basically nothing has really changed since 2015, and why bodies like Fair Square actually say the governance of FIFA is worse, which is that they never actually changed the role around executive president, which is an extraordinary level of power to be given to one bloke. And sort of essentially Infantino goes around, flying around the world in private jets, meeting the most important people in the world, stowing the power of football. It's similar with UEFA. And from that, obviously, you can see how it changes people, and obviously brings a kind of attraction to power. And this is all, of course, in a FIFA system where it's still the same patronage system that was under Blatter. FIFA redistributes its massive money, and the voters, who are the 211 member associations, return their votes. Infantino came in 2016 on the basis of a lot of election promises that were about money. And what does the club game do? Well, it gives you, it's where the money is. So that means it's where the power is. But of course, to do that, they need their own version of the Champions League. That hasn't quite happened organically, which suddenly we come round again to this, where the money's come from, the huge prize money and its potential effects in the game, where, the winners of this tournament are going to get, if it's a European winner, with the way some kind of the regulations work, it'll be about $90 million. I mean, that's in the world of PSR, that's game changing, and you can already see machinations as to why they want to do it more.
But the impact is even greater, surely, on... I mean, it won't be a non-European winner. I suppose you could maybe see a world in which one of the Brazilian teams wins it, but I mean, Boca Juniors are not very strong at the moment. Not quite sure whether Franco Mastantuono, River Plate's sort of star boy, will be playing for River or for Real Madrid, who've just signed him. But
I think he's not going till afterwards.
Is he not going till afterwards? Yeah. So he'll be at River still. But I don't think anyone thinks in South America those two are strong enough to win it. You might get that Flamengo or Palmeiras, potentially Botafogo, the reigning Libertadores champions, might be able to pose a threat if the European teams aren't up to it. We'll talk about that football side of it later. But the impact that it has that the prize money will have on lesser leagues, on the teams from Africa, from Asia, and to an extent South America, is enormous. I mean, is there going to come a point in the future where Auckland City don't win the New Zealand Championship? No.
But Mamelodi Sundowns already won 8 in a row, is it, in South Africa? 8 in
a row, and made the African Champions League final this year, as you can read about in Wilson's World, and beat Pyramids, I think. And they are all going to have this huge influx of cash. I've looked at a lot of Espérance de Tunis, the Tunisian team's social media stuff the last few days for a piece I'm trying to write. And if you look at kind of a lot of their games, they're played out in relatively empty stadiums. They will be making tens of millions of dollars. That is going to fundamentally realign Tunisian football for a generation. But I think the key thing here is that money is very clearly designed to... that's built in, that's coded into Infantino's vision of it, isn't it? That he is saying, we are basically hitching our wagon. This sounds really Eurocentric, and it's not meant to, but the European teams are...
Yeah, it's not Eurocentric, though.
Are the appeal. Yeah, if you don't have Real Madrid there, FIFA will be furious that Barcelona aren't there, that Liverpool aren't there, that Napoli aren't there. But if you don't have Real Madrid and Bayern Munich and Manchester City and all those, then there's a limited amount of appeal to the tournament. So Infantino's pitch to everybody else is, we'll have a World Club Championship. One of those lot will probably win it because they've got far more money than you. But in exchange, you get access to this huge amount of money that you wouldn't otherwise ever be able to countenance making, which is then given to Mamelodi Sundowns or Espérance de Tunis or whoever. That money will fundamentally realign those leads, and I think that's Infantino's pitch, that there is no way for a team from Tunisia or from South Africa to have that kind of global stage, to have that global income, that revenue, unless you're sharing it with European teams. And that again kind of embeds this idea that this tournament is good for everybody else in kind of the thinking of South American football politics, of African football politics, Asian football politics, which means that they are once more kind of even more deeply indebted to Gianni, which furthers his power base, which, and as Miguel's referred to this, basically gives him the edge over UEFA, which is what all this is about. That UEFA's big FIFA are deeply conscious of this, that UEFA's big edge in this whole power battle is that the most interesting, the most reliably interesting thing to fans, to football's huge global audience, is club football. That was always UEFA's thing. FIFA didn't really have any imprint there. And this is Infantino saying, actually, we're not happy with that. We want to take your thing away from you. We want to centralise power even more in FIFA. We're going to do it in the States, so all the clubs want to be here. We're going to kind of do it as a warm-up to the World Cup, so as Miguel says, it's like attached to that as well. But all of a sudden, it's FIFA saying, our tanks are on your lawn.
Roy, you've spent a bit more time, well, I used to spend quite a lot of time in the American market. What's the reaction within US soccer to this? Because it feels like this is going on their pitch while they are sidelined. I mean, you've obviously got the Inter Miami being put in through the back door, but it just appears that it feels a bit like those pre-season tours where clubs turn up, take the money, go home. That appears to be what's going on here.
Yeah, I can't speak for like the American market as a whole, because I think that's a more complicated. Yeah, I think over here we tend to kind of assume that it's really homogenous, but it's not. I think there's a lot more interest in the Premier League than there is in the Champions League, say. So I think one of the things that the continental European clubs always have to battle against is the fact that the Premier League is kind of the only show in town for English-speaking American audiences. There will be a big appeal to seeing Boca and River, and I presume the Brazilian clubs as well. And certainly there'll be an appeal to seeing like Monterrey and the Mexican contingent. They will have massive constituencies because America's such a big country. I think they have the same problem as we do, really, that they're not sure what it means. And until it starts, I don't think anybody, we'll come on to this a little bit later, I don't think anyone can actually project what it will come to mean until it started.
Yeah, I mean,
either positively or negatively.
Yeah, I mean, that's the point. That's, as I said at the start, that's the build-up to any tournament. It begins with doubt, doesn't it, of what's going to go on. But I mean, you've got Inter Miami there, you've got Seattle Sounders, and then we had LAFC, yeah, and they, I mean, MLS, is that going on at the same time? I think it is, isn't it?
I think it is. So what I would say about the American market is that, and I don't know what the root of this is, but I think they're much better than we are at having lots of things going on at once. My instinct as a European to like Euro-splain America to Americans would be that because they've got that kind of sporting landscape that's traditionally had four pillars, that they're used to the idea that, yeah, the NBA finals might be on at the same time as whatever's happening in baseball, or the Stanley Cup happens at the same time as the conference finals in the NBA. Like, they're okay to deal with that. And because it's such a big country, everything gets a chance to find its market. And I think that's, doubtless we'll end up doing an episode on this more broadly, but like, I think that's part of the thing that football's always misunderstood about the States, that you're not ever going to be first. You won't ever be the top, you're not going to recreate the sort of monoculture that we have in Britain in the States just because there's other sports there, and that's fine. You just have to be one of many.
Having said that, Rory, I do remember a fuss over the timing of the 2022 World Cup because, of course, that being in December is at the time when the NFL season kicks really into gear. And that
was the TV companies.
Yes.
What they were annoyed about was that, and that was to do with the broadcast deals that they had signed. I forget, it was probably Fox. Whatever they'd signed, they didn't realise that World Cup games would be competing with the NFL playoffs or the end of the regular season. They were understandably unhappy about that. I think it all got smoothed over with a nicer deal for the future tournaments or whatever. The other thing that the American soccer market has is that kind of desire to grow the game.
Yes.
I think that's relevant. So my sense is that like MLS and US soccer, although they've been cut out of quite a lot of these processes, I think they're kind of up for it generally.
Well, I think this is a key point to what we're talking about with Infantino as well. So, I mean, we had the thing 3 weeks ago where he turns up late for his own Congress because he's away in Saudi Arabia with Donald Trump. And UEFA, I find it remarkable, actually, that UEFA put these words into the public domain, attributed to them, attributed one of their statements, but they basically criticise them for prioritising private political interests. And I think so the view is, within UEFA, within a lot of the game, that what this Club World Cup almost represents is essentially the trading off of football, where without the game at large having much of a say in it. And one of the examples of that is, and why Infantino turning up late at his own Congress was so symbolic, given that he's supposed to serve those members, was actually something that Rory said there. So US soccer have absolutely no part in any of this. They've no part in the Club World Cup. They've no part in the World Cup itself, which is absolutely remarkable. people in the organisation even talk about how we're the host nation, but we're not the host federation. And what's even more incredible there is, so especially with the way the world is going and the way football is going, the current head of the US Soccer Federation is Cindy Paulo Cohen, a World Cup winner, an Olympian, someone who's an amateur coach in her spare time, has the kind of genuinely, demonstrably has the best interest of the game at heart. And she's nowhere to be seen in any of this. Instead, it's a Trump loyalist who's heading the kind of whatever task force they've dreamed up that's in the White House at the moment. And by extension, just come back to kind of Rory's earlier point on that, about kind of the prize money issue. This is where there's this schism between, I think, the nobility of the idea of the tournament, which I think is a good thing, and its execution. So FIFA have basically sold this and the idea that finally we need to move the elite game away from Western Europe and spread its immense wealth. Yes, a fair idea. What this actually does is, well, the way it's set up makes it look like that the Western European teams are going to get more money anyway. So that's going to, even though some non-European clubs get more money, it just extends the gap. And also, as Rory's already picked up on, it then extends the gap to the rest of the game. So it just be a bit like the modern Champions League, which it so wants to become. It's just in this kind of engine of disparity. And again, like just bringing into all these questions about who is running the game and for what reasons, because none of it actually seem, despite the idea, none of it actually seems in the best interest of what football is supposed to be for, to make it work properly.
Yeah, I couldn't help noticing when you mentioned US soccer, the CONCACAF Gold Cup's going on. Also taking part in the CONCACAF Gold Cup, Saudi Arabia. I mean, what do you know?
That is a traditional competition. The Gold Cup is traditionally competed for by the countries of North America and Saudi Arabia. It's fine.
But there is yet another angle there. So you can probably tell I've been immersed in all this for the past few days, and really the past 2 years. But I think this is where the Club World Cup is so destructive, because the calendar has obviously been the main focus, but it's not just about the calendar. It's also about how its imposition of the calendar starts to kind of tear up football's social contract. I've had a few echoes there to what's actually happening in America and the wider world. So, football really, a lot of its rules and kind of regulations and structures, if they're to be tested in court, they'd probably, they'd be undone. We're already seeing that in a lot of kind of competition law cases. People don't do that because obviously they realise this is how it all functions. But now FIFA, basically, they first of all, they've unilaterally imposed their competition on the rest of the game. That's the source of this legal complaint from FIFA, without consultation with anyone else. And as soon as you do that, then, they've also kind of run roughshod around their own rules on, say, international call-ups. Like, for example, how some of the England players are going straight from this dismal camp with Thomas Tuchel to what might not necessarily be the most kind of uplifting experience in America within the space of 4 days. Equally then, despite kind of FIFA previously having been so hardline about kind of the protection of the international breaks, well, Maurizio Pochettino is playing this Gold Cup without Weston McKennie and Timothy Weah because they're with Juventus. So suddenly kind of their own lines are blurred, and that's when the social contract of the game starts to come apart. And I think this does feed into then wider issues like the sanctity of domestic leagues. A lot of them outside the kind of major leagues are feeling real pressure at the moment, and all this sort of stuff. And it's why I think the real story with this tournament is just it's one of the most disruptive developments to happen in modern football, which is saying something given some of what we've had over the past 12 years. But then, I mean, you'd argue it's actually just a culmination of all of this.
Rory?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think what's amazing is how tied up in one person it is. That it does. I'm the same as Miguel, and we'll come on to this in a little bit, I think. But I like the idea of a Club World Cup. I think it's inherently a good idea. I think it's the sort of thing that should exist. I think we've had a conversation, possibly on this podcast, maybe not, with Wilson about how there isn't really space in the calendar for it, which I kind of buy to an extent, but I also don't think it should be beyond the wit of man to find a solution to that. Ultimately, it doesn't feel impossible that, if you think about football in 4-year cycles, that at some point you could say, it'd be quite nice to figure out kind of whether Fluminense can compete with Juventus. When you say it like that, I'm not sure why we need to figure that out, but it's nice to find out anyway. But it's hard not to look at the kind of 6-year process, maybe 7-year process now since Gianni revealed his deal that I think Tarek's touched on this, his deal with SoftBank that he'd done for this tournament, and at that point he very clearly decided, right, this is going to happen because someone wants to give us money to do it, and I don't think he's pocketing that money at all, but I think that Gianni Infantino recognises 100% that his power base is reliant on being able to generate as much money for the various associations, as we talked about, as possible. And he's kind of forced it through without... And the thing that really strikes me is just without any real thought of the consequences. And there's no one saying... He is so consumed with his desire to outstrip UEFA, to outmaneuver UEFA, that nobody is thinking, right, what's the best way to do this? And even if you look at quite a lot of the iconography around it, the kind of the mad trophy that moves and that was put up, set up in the Oval Office with Gianni's kind of fating of Trump is all to do. And like, look, I mean, who amongst us wouldn't be, not corrupted, but like enthralled by power? I'd be fascinated by power. I'd love to be close to the centre of power. It'd be amazing. But the way that it's become, more so even than the World Cup, I think that's absolutely right. I think this tournament has become like more than a passion project for Infantino. I think it's like it's something that he is just determined to do, regardless of any of the consequences, and that makes it quite, on one level, I think, quite dangerous.
Can I make a point beyond all of this stuff, which I think is, and it's something that's decried in certain newspapers, it's decried a lot by the man in the street. Listen, we've got an environmental disaster on our hands in this planet, yes. Do we really need another planet-shagging competition to add into this mix? I think FIFA at various times have paid lip service to, carbon replacement and built planting trees and all this type of thing, when you consider that expanding a World Cup to 48 teams is unnecessary. It won't produce necessarily the best football. And adding these tournaments, I mean, I think the Champions League is this bloated, Also, they're all flying on private planes. When you add the, how much fuel they're using up compared to, you getting on a Ryanair flight or whatever, it's absolutely obscene. And I actually have a real issue with these type of things. I think football is, and look at the people it's in league with, Aramco, the Saudi Arabians, Qatar, Abu Dhabi, these countries, the oil countries, the countries in whose interest it is in for oil to keep flowing out of the wells. I think football does not appreciate the environment and what's going in. Now, of course, in America, you'll have a big constituency of people who don't believe in this at all. One of them is the President of the United States, of course. Another person is the person that controls the Rupert Murdoch empire, namely Rupert Murdoch. That's a powerful power base, isn't it? The rest of us have to deal with the consequences of powerful men taking these decisions. And the World Cup is small beer compared to global travel and all the rest of it, but you talk about a social contract, Gel.
Yeah.
You talk about what football was supposed to be. What football was supposed to be the community. Football's supposed to do the best, and sport are supposed to be the best for humanity. And actually, they don't reflect that at all. And this issue, it's ignorance of it, I find really distasteful.
Just on that, it is worth raising, because actually I've been speaking to them a bit over the past few months and been meaning to do something with them, but football's relentless calendar hasn't yet allowed. But Fossil-Free Football are a group that's growing.
Good.
And kind of constantly speaking out about this. And so at the moment, they're actually, this morning, as we speak, which is the morning of Wednesday, 11th of January, they did put out a statement about, where some male footballers call on FIFA take urgent climate action. It probably speaks to a lot of, and I'm not doing the kind of their campaign down, which the reason I mention it is because it should develop support, but it probably speaks to a lot about kind of football's attitude to all this, and attitude to any sort of like genuine or necessary political debate. That the biggest name on it is David Wheeler, and fair play to him. But yeah, absolutely, and I think it's why it's so. Football actually, I mean, it's not just an engine of all these issues. It symbolizes so much thing, and it ends up being such a mirror. Like, and by the same token, you can see kind of how political developments in the real world are reflected in political developments in football.
But basically, football just doesn't care. That's the long and the short of it.
But just to pick up on something you said there, Rory, the greater issue is football actually doesn't care about itself either. I mean, you mentioned the calendar. Well, the reason we can't have a kind of a calendar where there's an obvious space for the Club World Cup is because everyone's suspicious of each other. No one wants to give up space because they all want to claim more, and because of the main factors that drive the game. So hence, as you say, FIFA and UEFA are locked in this war, which again comes back to the role of the presidents and kind of what their motivations are. But absolutely, it doesn't feel like any senior figure in football, or sorry, very few senior figures in football are looking at this in terms of what's actually the best holistic solution for the game as a whole.
But do you not think that's mirrored? The thing that always strikes me with that kind of football politics side is that is mirrored at every level. You're completely right. Like FIFA and UEFA and CONMEBOL and CONCACAF and all the others, they won't give any ground because they're protecting their own little bit because they don't trust the other side. But then you go to the leagues, then don't trust UEFA. The clubs don't trust the leagues. The clubs don't trust each other. Within the clubs, they don't trust themselves. Like the Premier League doesn't trust the EFL. Ligue 1 doesn't trust Ligue 2 or whatever. I mean, they'd probably trust each other. They're probably the same thing. But shrouded in this kind of climate of suspicion, which is not the same as the actual climate, which is the bit that's being destroyed. In terms of suspicion emissions, we're doing fine. I find it amazing. It's not like to hold it up as like a paragon of virtue in any way, but the number of times football has sent these missions to America, but we're going to watch the Super Bowl and we're going to learn all their secrets. We're going to find out what makes American sport so great, and for this we need 7 of us to go, all men, to Miami for 2 weeks, and we have to stay in a 5-star resort.
Yeah,
and it's very important that we're all there together all of the time. And the one thing, they brought back in the early 90s, it was let's have cheerleaders, let's have Monday Night Football, let's have, more of a TV product, let's turn the microphones to face the crowd rather than facing onto the pitch so it becomes more of a spectacle, all that stuff. The one thing none of them noticed about American sport, and it doesn't always hold true, but generally the direction of travel in the last 60 years in US elite sport in the major leagues is that all the teams work for the general well-being of the product. Yeah. They understand that if the league is healthy, if the product is healthy, then they are healthy. They need that. You can't have Donald Sterling saying all that stuff and being the owner of the Clippers. It just doesn't fly, so they get rid of him. They have a commissioner who is basically there as a lightning rod, kind of to enact their wishes, but also to kind of attract criticism, effectively. To kind of try and defend. Don Garber in Major League Soccer was great at this, but try and defend the interests of the league. Whereas within football, because everyone is fighting with each other all of the time, either nothing gets done, or as we're seeing now, everyone kind of puts their little kingdom together and says, right, that's my thing. Don't you fucking touch it.
There's a story on exactly that in States of Play, no less.
What's that?
It's fucking whatever.
Well, get 5 hours into the audiobook. It's
But there's an owner, one specific owner in the Premier League, who also has another sports operation in America. At one point after one meeting, they turned to someone and said, when we get together, it's usually to decide how much money we make. Here it seems like we're getting together to decide how much money we're going to lose. And I think you're exactly right. Now, and look, the American system isn't perfect because of what it represents and the way it kind of wrenches franchises away from communities and all this. But that doesn't mean the regulation within it isn't correct. And some of those regulations were actually... They had comparable measures at the foundation of English football in the 1880s, or the English League in the 1880s, sharing of gate receipts, all of this. But I suppose to wrap that up then, really what FIFA should be in all this is actually the ultimate regulator, the ultimate independent regulator. They should be coming into these situations and actually kind of saying, you can do this if you have a license to play football or whatever. I mean, I'm going beyond some elements of competition law here. But this is the sort of role that FIFA should have. And instead, it just inserts itself as not just a player in all this, but the most disruptive player. And hence, just firing up all these issues and suddenly leaving us with this tournament where it's hard not to feel the main intrigue around it has been all these kind of absurd politics around it rather than the actual football, because the football itself is distorted by some of these politics.
Okay, well... Good stuff there from Miguel to finish us off with the first half. The second half, we're going to actually try and talk about the football at this event. This could be quite difficult. See you after the break. Welcome back to part 2. So, as I said before, Rory Smith from the county of Yorkshire, Miguel Delaney from the county of Wicklow. We crack on. So, yes, the actual football. So once Inter Miami and El Ali kick off on Sunday, there is a competitive event going on here that teams are actually going to want to win, we think.
Yeah,
that's the question, isn't it? We think.
Well, I think the teams will, because, well, one, there's quite a lot of money at stake, so the clubs will be thinking we'd quite like that money. And two, as Miguel touched on earlier, like, you get to call yourself champions of the world. Like, whether that is a status that is accepted as meaningful immediately is different. But if you're Real Madrid or Man City or PSG or Inter or whoever it might be, you will be looking at it and thinking, this is our chance to call ourselves world champions. And if you're one of the teams that are going in from one of the other confederations who are less likely to win, I think the Brazilian and the Argentinian teams will be thinking, we've got a chance at this. They may be, certainly in the case of River and Boca, a little bit delusional, but they will be fancying their chances of going far. Botafogo are South American champions. Why would they not think we might be able to win this? I think they will be bound up for competing with the Europeans. That's the other thing. It's their chance to put one over on the old continent. If you look at the history of the Intercontinental Cup, the history of what became the smaller version of the Club World Cup, was basically Argentinian and Brazilian teams thinking, these Europeans are really arrogant, let's go and beat them. That was what animated those whole things. That, Racing against Celtic, Independiente against, I think, Manchester United. They were all kind of, the Argentinians in particular, saying, we really want to prove something against these Europeans. I think that vibe will exist over the next month. The question mark really is, will the fans take it seriously? And I'm really interested in this idea of prestige, whether you can't impose prestige, and you can't make prestige a thing that is directly linked to money. The pre-season tours can have massive prize pots, not as big as this, but you can make a lot of money from a pre-season tour. It doesn't mean anyone thinks it's real. This, I think, is an interesting one. The fact that ticket sales have been so bad genuinely surprises me a little bit. I wonder whether they might start to pick up once the tournament starts and people think, actually, do you know what? This is a real tournament. It is a chance to go and see a football match. Juventus are playing near me. I'll go and watch them. But the really interesting thing will be, particularly in Europe, do the fans start to believe that this is a real thing? Or does that slight sense of apathy that's been most pronounced in England, but I think exists elsewhere, does that just sort of linger for the entire month? And to be honest, 3 days out from it starting, we don't know. I have no idea which way that'll go, but I think it's a really interesting question.
Just to correct you though, Manchester United was Estudiantes.
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 Veron's father, wasn't it?
Striped shirt, black panties, as Frank Sidebottom once sang. There you go. No, but yeah, if you say Fluminense, I think that's
Fluminense. Do the Tim Vickery pronunciation.
Yeah, that's about as good as I get with that, unfortunately. But you'd fancy beating Borussia Dortmund, wouldn't you? You've got River Plate. Do they fancy Inter coming off the back of, claiming a scalp for a South American team? That in the group stage, that'd be huge, wouldn't it? That's the type of game where you're going to see competitiveness.
So I think it could be a little bit like the 2002 World Cup in that way, just in the sense of the 2000 World Cup was the first after the Champions League first expansion. By that point, 2 years on, a lot of squads were exhausted, at least those from the major players, which led to a series of upsets. And this could be a similar dynamic. I mean, you mentioned Inter there. If you're Inter, you're going on the back of a historic humiliation where they already looked exhausted. Then half the players go and get humiliated by Norway. And now they're going to make the trek to America, where they're all crying out for a break. This could go quite badly for them.
Manager's gone.
Yeah. And that is an extreme of, I think, a situation that a lot of European clubs could feel. There's another element to that, of course, which is like Brazil, they're mid-season. So it's going to be like the 2022 Qatar World Cup. They're coming in really fresh. And from talking to people who work with Brazilian clubs, they tend exactly what you guys have said. There's this kind of feeling or this spirit of we're going to show Europe what we're about. This is a chance to kind of give an account of ourselves. And I think even obviously there's an acceptance that Europe is a higher quality because they immediately take all their best players. And that's going to happen in this tournament already with Madrid and River Plate. But I think there's a belief that because of all these factors, that they can compensate maybe a lesser quality with this much greater desire. And that might actually make the tournament more unpredictable and interesting from a football perspective. I think we might see some new things. Abel Ferreira has been a kind of a coach of Palmeiras, has been looked at by European clubs for a while. But then the one kind of, wrinkle in all this is that just look at the other side of the Champions League final. Paris Saint-Germain have not exactly had a regular domestic league situation like some of their kind of rivals in this over the past year. They looked so fresh in the final. And afterwards, Luis Enrique was asked about the Club World Cup. I have not heard anyone, not even Gianni Infantino, speak as enthusiastically about the Club World Cup as Luis Enrique. And of course, then you get some of the bigger issues like the owners of City and Paris Saint-Germain are obviously seeing this in terms of kind of global projection. So yeah, PSG to win it.
Well, Pep's spoken pretty enthusiastically about it, and City have spent 100 million, 101 million, 111 million this week, I think.
It's inflating rapidly there, John, to be fair.
It is 111 million this week, I think, on players. Not sure all of them will be registered in time, but that is a club that, obviously, it's interesting, isn't it, that the Pep reboot will be taking place in front of our eyes. He won't have that pre-season to work with, though, which is interesting that he's whinged about. He's also talked about wanting a small squad. How can you do that when you compete over so many competitions? But they seem pretty fired up for it. It's Real Madrid are obviously, they got the Trent deal done, didn't they? In time for that, they will be strong. Even Rory, can you do me 5 minutes on Red Bull Salzburg?
I think Red Bull Salzburg, there's a couple of the European teams, and this as Miguel will know better than I do, this is partly the legacy of that battle between FIFA and UEFA, that with all due respect to Salzburg, to Porto and Benfica, to an extent, Juventus, really.
Yes.
You can't realistically make the case that Europe is sending its 12 best teams. I don't think anyone would pretend that it is. Whereas the South American contingent, those four are probably the strongest four Brazilian sides. River have been really good in the Libertadores for quite a few years. Boca, it feels to me like someone somewhere along the line has worked out a way to get Boca Juniors in there. I'm not quite sure they are the weakest of those six. Obviously in Africa, Al Ahly and Esperance de Tunis, Sundowns, and Wydad, they are probably the four biggest clubs in the African Champions League fairly consistently. Everyone else seems pretty strong. The one thing that I think will be really interesting is that the times that we tend to see South American teams in particular is against the European champions. You see them in the former versions of the Club World Cup. And, I remember watching Flamengo play Liverpool and give them a really, really good game, but it was very much, it had like FA Cup quarter-final vibes. It was one team that should really win against a team that was not as good as them, but was able to stifle them. It felt like that. And then Roberto Firmino scores a winner in extra time. Flamengo go home really proud that they've matched this super team from Europe, as they should have done. Just as Miguel says, there's like a massive economic disparity. The gap between like Fluminense and Borussia Dortmund is probably not that massive, to be honest. Dortmund are decent, they're not amazing. And I think those games will be interesting. An interesting like little thought experiment because I think we overestimate the gap in talent quite a lot of the time. That yes, the European teams are stronger, as Miguel says, they take all of South America's best players. That is where the talent coalesces in Europe. But at the same time, like beneath that, like how much better, like player for player, are Borussia Dortmund than the team that finished fourth in the Bundesliga, than a team that has been champions of South America within the last 2 years. Like the gap's maybe not that colossal, and I do wonder whether that might be in the interests of the tournament. That I think for the tournament to be a success, as FIFA want it to be, you probably need a European winner, but you need at least one South American semi-finalist, maybe two. And early on, you need a couple of European teams to get bloody noses.
I remember
you need someone to stand up to them and say, actually, do you know what? You're not all that. At that point, if Dortmund lose early on to Fluminense or Botafogo beat someone, I won't lie, don't know the groups off by heart, then I think at that point, the other European teams will be like, hang on, we could get embarrassed here if we're not careful, and they start taking it seriously, and also the fans start taking it seriously.
Well, I was going to say, 20 years ago, it was Liverpool lost to Sao Paulo, didn't they? Mm-hmm. And you would have said there wasn't much between those teams at that point. Now, obviously, the 2005 Liverpool team was slightly, it was a freakish win of that. It's fair to say. Even Liverpool
victory from Rafa Benitez.
Yeah, it was. But the difference between them, South American and European football, wasn't that great at that time. It feels like. But is it fitness? Is it training? Is it that makes the big difference these days?
But Rory's made an interesting point there as well. I think he said it earlier, where the last 20 years, essentially since that Sao Paulo victory, and that's 20 years on from when Zico's Flamengo absolutely destroyed the great Liverpool. Yeah, like in one of the great club, when there was a gap between South America and Europe. But like I said, for the last 20 years, obviously all of the great South American players, or sorry, even all the good South American players, not just great, go very quickly. Apart from the true stars, they probably had initial entry points into maybe some Italian clubs, specifically FC Porto. And in the last decade, kind of these clubs that kind of perfected this model of buying low and selling high. Sevilla, Dortmund. There's been a few in England, not quite to that degree. But now, look what Madrid are. They're taking River Plate 17-year-old wonder kid after the tournament, and we've also seen it with City, say, and Alvarez. Although it does feel like there's been some kind of evolution in that, and Madrid are obviously kind of really focusing on South American wonder kids now in the way Brighton used to say. But I suppose it just points to how that whole kind of dynamic has just been completely accelerated with this tournament. Might illustrate, but I think there is maybe one other interesting dynamic from that. I mean, one of the things that's now said before absolutely every single World Cup enduring it is that it's not like the old World Cups because we know everyone and we see that there's nothing new because the club game is different and we don't focus as much, or at least in Western Europe and particularly where we are in the UK, we don't necessarily focus much on kind of clubs outside Europe. Do we think that there might be one novelty to this tournament in terms that we are going to see something new?
I was going to say that. I mean, we don't. This is we've always looked at this like a South American European divide, and we know from the Premier League that there is a whole world of talent out there. You know, North African talent is. You're seeing some of the most skillful players that have ever played the game come from that area. Look at say Japanese and Korean players. They're very much in vogue up towards in the Championship and towards the bottom of the Premier League. I mean, you've got Endo at Liverpool. You've also got Mitoma, who is a much wanted player. There are different frontiers of football out there, aren't they? And that could be one of these tournaments to highlight that. I mean, you would expect that most clubs have scouts worldwide that already know who these players are, but there'll be a few players that will end up in the Premier League, won't they?
They do all have scouts worldwide, but one of the things that I think all clubs, even with data, struggle with in recruitment is like comparative testing. So they don't know if you might have a player at Urawa Red Diamonds or at Ulsan who looks amazing. You might like a 19-year-old midfielder at Ulsan and you think, this kid looks really good. But you have no idea really how he'll fare in Western Europe, not necessarily the Premier League, but Liga or the Eredivisie or whatever. So they all have they'll have gradations of leads. So you know how the Golden Boot functions, that if you score 30 goals a season in the Eredivisie, each of those goals counts like 0.5 towards the Golden Boot or whatever, but in Spain it's 1, or Premier League it's 1. Clubs will have gradations of leads. They'll be like, okay, so in South Korea we think that is roughly the same as a third as good as Liga, so you need to score roughly raw numbers, you need to score 3 times as many goals for us to be really impressed by your form in South Korea. But this is different. I think that it has to work like that because there's no other alternative. But this is a real chance to see how those players fare against European teams. The scouts will be taking it seriously, I think. That they will be looking at those teams, particularly from areas they trust, South Korea, Japan, North Africa, and South America, and thinking, do you know what, if that guy does well against Borussia Dortmund or against FC Porto, then that's pretty powerful evidence that he might be able to cope in the Primera Liga or Serie A. That enables us to place him much more accurately, because that's the one thing that scouts can never really do when they're working completely theoretically, whether they're watching them in the flesh, whether they're watching them on Y-Scout, or whether they're watching them just through the numbers. You don't know how any of that translates. This is a chance to compare across cultures, and is that not what football's about, John?
Well, yeah, but there is that adage, though, isn't there? Never buy a player after a good tournament. But is it different if it's a club tournament? Because
I think it wouldn't be enough to make you, if you're a smart club, when most teams now are relatively smart, if you're a smart team, you wouldn't buy someone just as they did well in the Club World Cup.
The Karol Poborski effect,
yes. The Karol Poborski effect. But if you've been watching the South Korean equivalent of Karol Poborski, and you think that kid's numbers are pretty good in the K-League, and he's done really well in the Club World Cup. Do you know what? Actually, we're going to take a bit of a gamble here. If you're Celtic or someone, I reckon that will make a difference.
Yes. Well, I mean, Celtic. I mean, it's a United Nations stuff there, isn't it? These days, because the market for world players is bigger, and that I mean, Rory, you say that in a slightly sarcastic term, but it is. That is the good aspect of it. I mean, despite my environmental misgivings, we are going to learn something about those players, and maybe those are the games we want to watch close it if we can.
I'm really interested. I'm genuinely really interested. I think this is like a horrible, venal, craven Gianni Infantino tournament that has been staged purely for the greater glorification of one man and to make money, and it's a power grab and it's a land grab and all that stuff. But at the same time, I quite want to see how Boca Juniors do, because I love Boca Juniors, and I want to see if Franco Mastantuono is any good. I really want to see that, and I think is this not
17-year-old? Yeah.
To make it depressing, is this not the problem? That football itself is so powerful and so good that you're like, do you know what? I will watch that World Cup in Qatar, and it'll be amazing. And that is that's what all of this rests on. That we're like, do you know what? Actually, I don't know who's in Boca's group, but like
Bayern.
Boca Juniors against Bayern I'm interested in that football match.
So that's been quite a nice thing, because Bayern so Thomas Muller was basically kind of enthusing about, this is great, a game against Boca Juniors, which is, I mean, given everything he's had in his career, is quite a nice thing actually, that he's excited for this game.
I tell you what though, you can't underestimate how much footballers love Boca Juniors.
It is true.
They really love Boca. Players love. So Haaland's posed with I might write about this. Haaland's posed with a Boca shirt. Ander Herrera and Daniele De Rossi have both gone to play for them. Yeah, as you say, Muller was excited by playing Boca. A lot of them really love that kind of mythology of Boca in particular.
That's Maradona, surely, as well. A lot of it. Maradona feeding into the atmosphere.
I think it's the stadium, it's the ticker tape, it's all the iconography. It's just, and it's also, do you know what? It's a world they don't know. I think that's the main thing that does for them. They live in this cosseted, like elite environment, and that's great. That's where they need to be. But I wonder if for a lot of them they do, if the ones who really love football, and not every great football player loves football, but the ones who really love it, I think are the same as us. They will see pictures of the Bombonera on their social media. They will have read books or magazines or whatever. They'll have read Andy Mitten's Derby Day series in 442. Do you know what I mean? They will be imbued in it.
I mean, a personal fine memory of one of the best memories of my career is going to a game that didn't actually happen. But not the game. But a few days beforehand, when me and Rory went to what was basically this is the 2018 Libertadores, when River were finally playing Boca in the final, and me and Rory went to the training session. But it wasn't really a training session at the Bombonera. It was kind of like this kind of army send off. Like the stadium was absolutely rammed. I've never seen an atmosphere like it, and this for kind of just this kind of almost a presentational event, and it was incredible, really.
Yeah, we got dropped off in a taxi as close as we could get to the Bombonera. Still had to walk like a mile through the streets of La Boca, and just this huge like flood of people. And then you got to the stadium, and it was like it was just get into any entrance available, clamber up into the stands. We made it to the press box initially, and it was just full. There were people with dogs in there. I remember thinking, don't you bring your dog here? And then we went back outside to try and get around to, the sheer wall of boxes at the Bombonera. We tried to get round there, and we succeeded eventually. But my main memory of that whole day is doing it with Miguel and walking around in La Boca, which is a fairly rough bit of Buenos Aires, in this crowd of 100,000 people, something like that. There were at least 70,000 inside the stadium and more outside. And Miguel just refusing to not look at his phone. And I just kept thinking, Miguel, put your phone away.
I was getting great content. I don't think it was yours that went more viral. But one of my main memories actually is, I think just before we got to the press box, we were up in that. I think we went into initially one of the ends, and we just walked in. It was absolutely rammed, and there was a lot of kind of scenes of basically blokes kind of trying to get over in a fence into another area, or kind of just hoist themselves up to be seen, and then falling down and shredding their legs on barbed wire or something similar, and not caring. But this is something we're not going to see in the Club World Cup, because it's a much more sanitised experience.
Plenty of seats are still available.
Hopefully not. So, somewhere in there, we found some positivity about the Club World Cup, about which we'll be talking a lot more over the summer. So, with that, let me remind you to subscribe, tell all your mates, email us at liberopodcast0@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. There's been a bit of movement in and out on this one, we know. And thank you to producer Tom, as ever. And thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week, where the chaps will be going over, what will we be going over? The transfer talk, the Club World Cup. I'm sure something big will have happened in between then and now. So, goodbye.